You haven't heard much unless you've been listening to conservative news outlets. But I'll tell you what, it's starting to open up a little bit because people are realizing the atrocities. And I tweeted out this weekend to atheists. I said, tell me you think this is wrong. And I showed a picture of the baby boy that you've seen probably with his spinal cord snipped. And I tweeted it, just not to atheists, I tweeted it to leftists, statists, atheists, you know, with all the groups that I could think of that advocate on a regular basis for no limits on what they call abortion, which is actually infanticide in this case. And oh, the outrage. Do you know, I got called every name. I got every kind of threat, every kind of thing you can think of. They said everything. They posted it on their sites and they bombed me on Twitter, you know, tons of responses calling me all sorts of horrible things. But do you know, not one of them ever said, yes, I agree, that's wrong. Not one.
Right, they say, how dare you?
How dare you
associate
abortion and atheism.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they never did say, of course, absolutely agreed. That's wrong and awful. And maybe there should be some limits on what we're labeling abortion. Nope. Well, a great part of what happened here is actually very much in line, in my view, with what has happened regarding gun legislation as a result of Sandy Hook and the Connecticut shootings. I believe this has more to do with an institutional political correctness than anything else. And a little bit, and this is the most sickening part, not just the political correctness, but the personal profit motive for a lot of the folks who could have put a stop to Gosnell, who could stop still the murders of our children in our schools. Yes, I did just say that. Go ahead and quote me and slam me for it, liberal. I don't really care because we're talking about dead kids here, dead babies here. So I don't really care what you want to say about me, what accusations you want to make about me. One employee from Pennsylvania's Department of Public Health did alert her supervisors about the disgusting conditions at Gosnell's Women's Medical Society clinic. Still, no action was ever taken against Gosnell. This, according to Breitbart. We're going to have John Nolte on here in just a moment. Lori Matticu went to Gosnell's clinic in July of 2008. Imagine how many lives could have been saved if the atrocities had stopped there. She was going on a vaccine inspection. Gosnell provided children's vaccine through a program by the Philadelphia Health Department's Division of Disease Control using the name Family Medical Society. Although actually at this point it's debatable whether Gosnell ever even gave any vaccines. He just took the taxpayer dollars for having given them. So there were emails dating back to August 2011 stating Gosnell was suspended numerous times for failing to maintain logs and for storing vaccines in filthy, unsuitable refrigerators and at improper temperatures. And continued to practice. Magic, who immediately contacted her superiors, identified by the grand jury as Program Manager Lisa Morgan and Medical Director Dr. Barbara Watson. This should have prompted an immediate investigation. You say vaccines are being put in the bodies of children that have been improperly stored, may be ineffective, may be otherwise messed up, and nothing's done? Magic, you waited for the women to try to contact Gosnell. She noticed signs taped on the front desk. One was a price list for abortions detailing the costs for different gestational ages with a price list for 4 different levels of anesthesia. A third sign announced, if you have the pre-procedure blood tests and the workup done and change your mind about the abortion, you're still going to be paying for the cost of the tests. I wonder if that included ever any sort of ultrasound, don't you wonder? Magic Hugh noted that the office was not clean and many areas of the office smelled like urine, she put in her report. She also reported a dark layer of dust and described enormous fish tanks filled with murky water. We keep hearing about this, and I actually saw, and I tweeted out, an article that Nick sent to me on my Facebook page that was talking about how Gosnell was really a naturalist. He loved frogs and lizards, or frogs and fish, or frogs and turtles. I can't even remember now, but how he was really a naturalist. The human side of Kermit Gosnell. The human side? There's no human side of a monster. Disgusting that anyone would even waste blog space on that, and it tells you how desperate the left is to try and change the subject on Gosnell. So this inspector in the refrigerator found expired vaccines. Now this was in 2011, and some of these dated all the way back to 06 and 05. The temperature log, which was supposed to record the refrigerator temperature, hadn't been marked since the 2nd day of June, a month and a half ago from that time. She also found a stack of temperature logs already filled out, showing the readings twice a day with no initials, time, or month. So it was already filled out, and so all they had to do was go in and forge, basically, vaccine dates that were dealing with temperatures that were dealing with people's children's lives. How many fingers did this need to slip through? How many people didn't take personal responsibility for what they were seeing? And how many of us in our daily lives aren't really taking personal responsibility for what we're seeing? And how different are we from those covering up the atrocities in Nazi Germany? I'm just asking the question. The clinic staff told Magicu that Dr. Massoff had abruptly left in June, and Gosnell was unfamiliar with the program. When asked to see the vaccines that were administered, they told her they had none. You hear me now? Here he's getting all this money for these vaccines that are being improperly stored, and all of a sudden we find out that they weren't even giving vaccines. It was a lie, and no one did anything. How did this happen? How many lives could have been saved? We continue this conversation here on the Dr. Gina Show right after this. You won't want to miss. We have been talking about Gosnell, and some of the lamestream media is beginning to pick up on this because they're being forced to, because you have forced them to. Well done. Well done. But the sickening part is how soon this could have been stopped, and the reason that these sorts of problems, and I am equating what happened with Gosnell and those babies and moms that were killed at his hands, I believe the blame lies in the same place for that as it does for what happens in these school shootings. And I'm going to make my case for you. I'm going to make my case for you. The mental health profession, as you know, has been taking a tongue lashing after the whole Sandy Hook incident. And I began to ask myself the question, is Gosnell crazy? Does it matter if he is? Well, the only reason it does matter is because he shouldn't get off for being crazy, but it matters if he is some sort of sick serial murderer, because we need to know the signs. And just like mental health professionals who are honest with themselves will admit that many times people who, for example, are child molesters will go into fields like teaching, where they have a lot of time around children. Just like that, someone who is a serial child murderer might go into the field of being an abortionist. Hang me, crucify me for saying so, but you know it's the truth. You know it's the truth. So the mental health profession deserves the tongue lashing that's coming. And as someone in the mental health profession, I have 2 master's degrees, an undergrad and a PhD, all in these fields. One doesn't have to do much guesswork to get to know how the mental health professions are failing, and I think I know why. On the issue of mental health, you wait hours in an ER, and then you're told, well, this person has to be in immediate imminent danger, or someone in their presence has to be in immediate imminent danger, or we can't really do anything for you. If they do ever get medication, the medications are dulling, and the mental health patients don't want to take them. That clanking is actually my earring blowing in the wind. There's nothing I can do about that right now. It's kind of like a little wind chime. The chances of you being helped with a mental issue rather than actually being arrested for a crime are 4 to 1. You probably won't get help before you commit a crime. Most people with a mental illness, though, you should know, are not dangerous and don't pose a mental health risk. The definitions of those who are mentally ill are gray and cloudy. Doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't really know in this culture, when we say someone with a mental illness, we don't really know whether we mean someone with a disability, whether we mean someone who is unstable enough to do harm, or whether someone who's only mentally unstable enough to do harm to themselves. But the fact of the matter is, most people with a mental illness are much more likely to be the victim of a crime than they are a perpetrator. But at the same time, while you might take comfort in that, it also means the system pushes them aside until there is a crime. When we define mental illness, are we talking about those who've been through post-traumatic stress disorder, like many of our veterans? Are we talking about someone who has a genetic disability, someone, for example, with Asperger's? Is that a mental illness? Not to most people. But when we are classifying these mentally ill people to try to make sure they never have guns, what if you're ADD, like me? Schools don't teach how to help. They teach victimhood and recidivism as good business practice. If you are in a mental health profession, what do you want? You want a regular, ongoing flow of income. That means you're really not taught to heal people, especially in the first or second setting. You're kind of taught how to listen to them, how to deflect anger, how to validate them, and when to call someone to put them on medicine, which then dulls their senses. They don't like it. It doesn't make them feel well, and so they go off of it. These are the problems. After Virginia Tech, a bill was passed to spend $40 million in new mental health spending, but then 1 year later, $50 million cut from mental health. And so will the mental health experts use something like what happened in the shootings in the schools to say that we should dedicate more money to mental health? Of course, but will that money actually get to the root of the problem? Probably not. In 1970, Israel passed the most effective bill in history preventing school deaths by gun violence. Remember that? I talk about it almost every day. They armed volunteers and administrators in school, and since that day, they haven't had a single school shooting, mentally ill or otherwise. It is naive to think that Israel magically has less mental illness than the U.S. So is the problem really mental illness? And then is the problem throwing money, more money, at the mental health industry, who already doesn't fix the problems, doesn't even address them in their learning institutions? We don't base laws in this country on what works scientifically very often. We base it on political correctness. In the case of Kermit Gosnell, for example, he was above the law or investigations that take place for McDonald's, for crying out loud. Every corner diner, for one reason or another, is investigated and inspected over and over again and shut down if they don't have proper hand-washing technique. Are you kidding me? Expired vaccines put in our children in Gosnell's office, babies and mothers murdered, and he's not shut down until we have such a record of bloody carnage in his path that they have no option. Why? Because I will submit to you, it's because they're an abortion facility. Abortion is the Justin Bieber of the politically correct lot, and so they are given a pass that a corner diner isn't given when it comes time to inspect abortion clinics treated with kid gloves. You can think I'm making this up. I don't care. I know it to be true. In graduate school, I confided about how little we knew in terms of actual therapies to help those in dangerous situations and how much we knew about perpetuating victimhood extending social services, and creating a need in the social services system that would provide gainful employment for the rest of our lives as mental health professionals. I was taught that conservatism was a mental illness, that personality profiles of Hitler, Machiavelli, and others were fascist and were a result of radical right-wing politics. This is, of course, historically false. All were leftists, believing in big governments and winning their own power by any means necessary. I was taught to diagnose but not to treat, only to talk. I was taught how to legally protect myself by keeping certain records and not keeping other records that might have been helpful to the patient but might get a therapist into trouble. I was taught mandatory reporting of potential abuse and how it was related to radical Christian families in big ways, especially those who homeschool. I was never taught to do what if I had a case of a mental illness that was declining on my hands unless it was to medicate. The trouble is the medications are complicated and many patients don't want to take them. Then there is no protocol. Interestingly, as one who asked too many questions, but was the president of my undergraduate honor society, the school faculty in my master's program saw me as a liability. They knew I was a conservative, and they didn't want me to pass for that reason alone. I did not subscribe to their politically correct ideology. Despite a 3.8 GPA in my first master's degree program, the school that tried to keep me from passing by failing me in the 11th hour at my oral exam, an exam I later learned was a formality that no one had ever failed before, but I did, as president of the Honor Society with a 3.8 GPA. Ultimately, over time, they gave up because I continued to fight, but I had to leave that school, transfer to another state so that I could go in undercover because it was clear to me that schools did not like conservatives and did not like students who asked hard questions. At my new school, I kept my head down and my mouth shut, and I went along to get along so that I could ultimately receive my second master's degree and PhD, which cost me a lot of money, by the way. Somewhere about halfway through my second master's program, I received my initial master's degree from the other school. I don't mind having 2 master's degrees, but it was an unnecessary and expensive occurrence and happened only because the administration at my first school wanted to keep me from ever practicing because I didn't subscribe to their statist, politically correct agenda, period. This illustrates the extremes that these schools will go to keep a conservative from among their ranks. Conservatives are a danger to political correctness, to entitlement dollars, and to the masquerade that the psychological fields perpetuate. And American health professionals, mental health professionals, are gladly going to accept any money that comes their way under the shroud, really, that they might actually find something that works. But the bottom line is they're not willing to accept what really will work. We have a system that turns out killers into the world, and they will use the money to line their own pockets and legitimize their own professions in mental health. But the reality is the profession has no idea what to do to prevent such crimes. No idea what to do, because there has never been a focus on the profession that is marred by political correctness. That is adherence to the leftist ideology and self-proliferation. When those are your top 2 priorities, you can't save lives. Do you see how these things are related? They wouldn't inspect the abortion clinics because it is politically incorrect to cause abortion clinics any trouble. And in the case of the shootings, they won't look at what really works, like the Israel model, because 1, the mental health professionals want the money even though they don't know what to do once they have it, and nothing will change. And 2, they're not going to admit that putting guns in the hands of trained volunteers in schools is the answer, even though it is. It means not one more dead kid since 1970 when they did it in Israel. They lie. It's political correctness that has caused the problems and the deaths of these babies, these mothers, and these children. And mental health professionals like me had better take a really hard look in the mirror before we go judging anyone else.